Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
The Nazis next door. I lived in the same HOA off and on in my 20s and early 30s. There were 3 to 4 streets and probably no more than about 60 houses in the development. It was a zero-lot line community, and of course, the very worst of the worst HOA Nazis lived right next door. I received handwritten complaints inside my mailbox, illegal by the way, on multiple occasions. The ones I remember were about trash cans left out too long. I was in major depressive states on those occasions, and essentially in order to keep my dog quiet, inside my own house. When I wasn't even there, they would invite themselves over to my front yard to ambush me while outside with, "Your garage door doesn't need to be up right now," or "Your front shrubs need to be trimmed," or "This oleander never should have been planted here." On so many of these occasions, I wanted to tell this jerk where he could stick it, but he was a good 30 years older and so ridiculously entitled. I didn't have the guts, and it probably wasn't worth it. At some point, my close family member directly across the street started yelling at them as soon as they stepped foot off the road and onto the front of her property. When I left for a few years, the house sat empty while the homeowner, my family member, was in a nursing home, and moved back things escalated. Before I had left, these Nazis had routinely parked a minivan in their driveway. Then their live-in, 30-something-year-old adult son got a new car and wanted it more protected, so he made some kind of deal with a woman down the street to use her garage since she didn't need the second parking spot. Fine, cool, I don't care. What I did care about was when they started complaining about cars in my driveway. This wasn't something I did regularly, but my very close friends ended up in a legitimately unsafe situation where they lived and came to stay with me while they figured out how to get out of their lease and move. The HOA Nazi next-door neighbors lost it. They tried to throw the bylaw book at me for having cars stored in the driveway. The cars were being used daily and lots of other people parked in their own driveways consistently. At this point, I went through the bylaws with a fine-tooth comb. As it turned out, there was a rule explicitly barring one homeowner from using the garage of another homeowner. Why? I don't know or care. Of course, there was a rule that didn't need to be followed, but our driveway had to be clear, shrubs trimmed to their liking, and trash cans brought in before the garbage truck was off the street. There were a couple short cul-de-sacs in the neighborhood that ran right up to a ravine, so there was no house at the end of these streets. Apparently, these Nazis didn't like that a homeowner parked his work-supplied and branded truck on the street at the end of his cul-de-sac. Their first call to complain wasn't to him, wasn't to the HOA. It was to his employer that supplied the truck. These people were ruthless and garbage humans. These are the same neighbors that complained that I didn't pick up my dog's poo in my own front yard. We didn't have backyards at all, and almost no one had grass in their small side courtyards. They were upset that my 10-pound dog who runs straight out to pee and straight back wasn't on leash because their dog was aggressive and pulling if out at the same time. Because clearly my dog being on a leash would totally fix that. Once we got a third car and parked it routinely in the driveway, they completely lost their minds. Knocking at all hours to complain while I worked enterprise sales at home. Literally peeking over their courtyard wall into my kitchen. Making nasty comments to my boss about me who they went to church with, and calling my parents and other family to complain about me. These same people caused other residents to walk a certain route to avoid going past the Nazi house. It was a quiet neighborhood, so anytime someone had a party, there was a noise complaint and lots of spying on what exactly was occurring, followed by more complaints more often than not. They convinced the HOA that we shouldn't be allowed to attend HOA meetings or use the pool because our names weren't on the deed. This even though we paid all the bills, taxes, and HOA fees directly. Eventually, they let me in the meetings but tried to tell me that I couldn't speak. That didn't last long. Then they tried to not allow me to vote until my father showed up to a meeting to remind them that he owned 2 properties in the neighborhood by proxy, power of attorney. My final straws were when they had their roof replaced and their roofers entered my courtyard unannounced, seeing me partially clothed in my own kitchen and then trampling my landscaping every day for a week. After that one, I was throwing roofing nails back over their wall and onto their driveway for months. They officially complained to the HOA about a small tree that wasn't trimmed to their liking, so I brought up their son's car in the neighbor's garage, and the woman who owned said garage ended up throwing a tantrum completely with fake tears in my living room because apparently he was paying her and she needed that income. However, it was particularly satisfying when my partner told the next-door neighbor that he didn't like the highly pruned style of their front yard and preferred our slightly more wild look. I swear that man turned as bright red as a fire truck. Almost as red as when we pointed out that the neighborhood really wasn't that nice due to the enormous metal electric towers running down the middle of our street. There were islands in the road to accommodate these huge things that you could hear buzzing even from inside 24/7. About 6 months before we bought our house and got the heck out of there, I was walking my dog, on leash, and she peed in another neighbor's yard on the way by. We turned to continue, and I heard a voice say, "Clean up after the dog." Well, I turned around and there was no one there. This woman was yelling at me through her doorbell about non-existent dog poop. I am not proud to say that I saw red and proceeded to read her the riot act into her doorbell and pressing it repeatedly, telling her to come out. She never said another thing, never came out, and I never did see the woman ever. I never did bring up that my awful neighbors had at least 2 business running out of their house, strictly forbade in the bylaws, literally broke into the irrigation system controls to water their yard more on the HOA's dime, or that they had a visible water spigot and hose in their front yard. It just wasn't worth it. Perhaps this was more of a post about bad neighbors, but I will never ever, as long as I live, own or live in an HOA again. My family is fully out of there now, and no one has anything nice to say about the place. You have a bad neighbor. Welcome to the club, but not really an HOA issue. You are equally bad. Throwing nails into the driveway? Come on, you are in criminal land there. You are both going tit for tat, and you even admit you have violated some of the covenants. And why would the HOA talk to you? You are not the owner. Doesn't matter if you pay the bills or not. Net, you have a neighbor issue, and you are a neighbor's issue. Either be an adult and work it out, or one of you has to move. By the way, stop with the Nazi references. It trivializes the real Nazis. Quote, welcome to the club, but not really an HOA issue. End quote. A bad neighbor with no power is an annoying blowhard. As long as they work within the law, they're ultimately nothing but a social risk, even at maximum pettiness. A bad neighbor with an HOA is somebody who has the legal authority to vote themselves either your time or your money. All they have to do is get the bylaws changed, and you must either dance or pay up. At maximum pettiness, bad neighbor plus HOA is an actual financial risk that can cost you your house. It's exactly like how a bad man with a gun is objectively more dangerous than a bad man with nothing but an attitude. Quote, you are equally bad. Throwing nails into the driveway? Come on, you are in criminal land there. End quote. How exactly is it a crime to give somebody back their own trash? If a nail is so dangerous that it's a crime to give the nails back, then doesn't that make it a crime to landmine somebody else's property with the same nails in the first place? I grew up able to walk around in my own yard barefoot, so what if I did that here, stepped on a rusty nail, and got tetanus? Nails in grass are a health risk to humans. At least when a nail is on pavement, then you can step around it because it is not hidden by the grass. An occasional bark isn't a deal, but if the dog is barking constantly, then training will fix it. Minimal just because it is inside the house. Depends on how close the houses are, where the dogs are in the house, what kind of barking. Let's put your bedroom window 8 feet away from the neighbor's den where a husky spends all day singing the song of her people. Then tell me there's only minimal noise. Never mind that if the dog is barking all day, it is stressed, lonely, and you are a bad owner for not taking care of your dog. If you like our stories, then please like and subscribe and comment, and remember to hit that bell icon so you never miss out. We have new stories almost every day. Once upon a time, my HOA fined me $6,000 for weeds. Buckle up. I made this needlessly long. 3 years ago, I let a couple, my friends, move in with me as roommates. The problem was that they had young, untrained German Shepherd, and I had a traumatized rescued lab, pit mix. Our dogs didn't get along. I bought muzzles for both dogs and said when they are out of their rooms, they wear these, and eventually they'll probably get along. Well, they were too lazy to put theirs on their dogs, so they just locked him in their room all the time. So the dogs didn't get better, they got worse. It's pretty bad to keep 2 male dogs in a house separated together but not let them interact at all. One time they finally came into contact and my dog bit their dog. They hated my dog and talked badly about him all the time. They kept telling me I should give him back to the shelter and get a nicer dog. Their dog also responded badly to my dog and was just as aggressive. He just didn't bite him. The dog had one small puncture that didn't even bleed. Then my dog started getting sick. I'm bipolar, so logically assumed he was being poisoned. I was 24 years old. I have always been terrified of confrontation. I was the youngest in a very abusive family where I had been the scapegoat. I had no ability to stick up for myself or confront someone. I just freeze. I felt trapped again, like I was living with my family. Also, my ex-boyfriend was a pedophile, and I was scared he was going to kill me. But that's another matter, so I couldn't accuse them and decided instead to grab some of my stuff and run away. I moved to another city and stayed in a hotel looking for a job. I got a job at a horse ranch and moved to another state to work there. I had been dating the love of my life at the time. But he was like, "This bitch is crazy." He was away on business, and when I told him that I had run away, he broke up with me. Devastating. All my bills were on auto draft, so I just went home to working 12 to 16-hour days, 6 days a week, focused on money and friendship at work. It was actually a summer camp ranch. It was really, really tough work, but it was all to take kids horseback riding, so it was very fulfilling. I worked with a lot of autistic children. It was an adventure. A lot of it was fun. It felt worth it. In the very end, the ranch totally effed me over. I got in trouble for letting kids trot on rides. It was against the rules. However, all I would do is take these kids on 2-hour walks, and then at the end, if they had done well and were really confident, I'd let them kick their horses into 1 30-second trot, and they would cherish it. They would laugh so hard and get so excited. Just for a taste, I wanted to have an impact on these kids. I wanted them to love animals and the outdoors. I gave them a small highlight of their trip. Anyways, everyone was doing this to some degree. Most much worse than me. It's just that I was brazen enough to take videos of the kids trotting, like a 15-second video of giggles and smiles, and it sent it to the families. One posted it on Instagram and she found it. Well, the manager's wife hated me. She was ugly and her husband was handsome. She had gotten with him when he was fat and then he lost all the weight. She has a great body, but her face is literally scary. And I was pretty. Her husband and I got along well. He reminded me of the part of my brother I loved, without the meth, the ivory, lies, beatings, etc. He was much older than me, but that's how I saw him. I didn't want to date my brother. I wanted his wife to be my sister. And that's how he saw me. We had a special unspoken relationship. They used to fight over me. She hated me and he cared about me. One time they were fighting and he hit his head into the microwave so hard it was bleeding, in a trailer, while I stood outside. Well, she finally had her ammunition to take me out. My car was broken down and I needed $3,000 to fix it to return home. At the ranch, we were only paid a bonus every 3 months. Other than that, we lived off of tips. I was to be paid $3,000 in 2 weeks, but if I left before 3 months, I would be paid nothing. It was a very illegal contract, but she had me fired and then I was evicted and left without pay. I had about $600 and needed to pay a $1,200 mortgage in a week. My roommates had also stopped paying me rent. This creepy guy in his 40s had come on a ride once and offered me a job at a yak ranch nearby. He had an insane 2-year-old boy. His wife was apparently a young immigrant girl that had left him after getting her citizenship or something. She had been a terrible mother because her son was completely uncontrollable. He was still doing everything he could to deny her contact with him. By the way, she was white like Australian or something. The boy was a monster. He was a ginger. First off, he would have temper tantrums that would last for hours. He would scream, just scream very high-pitched at the top of his lungs and kick the floor with his feet. If you told him he couldn't eat something he wanted to eat or didn't allow him to play with something he wanted, or if he got bored, or if the sky was cloudy or a bug existed, or literally anything, if you touched the kid, he effing cried. I don't know, maybe there was something developmentally wrong. I promise you I love children and was very gentle. He got much better under my care. Anyways, I was his nanny for the longest 6 weeks of my life before he gave me enough money to drive back to my home. The guy clearly wanted me to replace his wife and he was disgusting. Like he only inappropriately touched me once, but emotionally he was trying to get me to love him. He was ugly and old and weird. Anyways, that was done. I fixed my car and I returned home. I stayed with my ex-love of my life while I evicted my roommates for not paying rent. No, we didn't get back together. They moved out and stole $7,000 of my stuff. I buy all my stuff used and don't have receipts, so my insurance wouldn't cover it at all. I go get my mail and find out my HOA had been fining me like $100 a day for 6 months and I owed them $6,000. I'm the last house on the street. My outside is a driveway and a side yard. Next to my side yard, there is a wall. No one lives across from me. My yard is literally invisible. The side yard is a bunch of rocks. I look outside and sure enough, there are several clusters of weeds that are a couple inches tall. But maybe 10% of the yard was covered in these groups of weeds. I hadn't thought about my HOA at all in the previous 6 months of nonsense. So I wrote them and demanded a hearing. They said my house had to be in compliance first. So of course I cleaned my yard. They sent me a letter saying they couldn't do the hearing because the yard wasn't clean enough. They also wanted me to trim some very small shrubs and prune my lone small tree. So I do it. Then they write me that the screen in my upstairs window was slightly bent. I have no idea how they could have possibly noticed that. Would that lower your neighbor's property value if shutter or window screen has a tiny shadow on it in the distance? So I replaced the window screen. Then they say they will have a hearing eventually where I could make my case to the board. The whole time I'm like crying hysterically all the time, lol, because I was like, I'm going to lose my house over weeds. And not in a fun way. Anyways, that was 2 years ago and I haven't gotten any letters or notices since then. I've just been paying my dues and anxiously opening in the mail every month and checking Credit Karma daily. This is why young people shouldn't own houses in HOAs. Also, when I returned, I found out my HOA dues hadn't been paid either. The property manager changed and stopped my automatic monthly payment. I was supposed to create an account on a new website, so I assumed it was being paid. Anyways, for not paying that for 6 months, they had already filed a lien and were seeking foreclosure. So I borrowed $3,000 from my business partner to stop all of that immediately. What a rant! I never pay my HOA dues with autopay. I would never recommend setting it for autopay to anyone. I want to get that bill every month and make sure I send out a check for it. You never know what will happen, but at least if you don't receive that bill by a certain date, you know to call. It also allows for a paper trail and documentation in case they increase dues or do something else. Be very cautious of who you let live in your home. While it might sound like a good idea to live with friends, don't. This is a good example of why not. The HOA board seems to be dicks. I don't know what state you are in, but in California, if a request for a hearing is made, you have to hold a hearing at least to gather all the facts regarding the issue. The HOA placing a lien is kind of a last resort. I believe they probably could have worked out a payment plan had they actually used a professional collection agency. But they probably did it the cheap way. I hope you are seeing a psychologist and get treatment for your condition. If not, I suggest you find one. If you have renters or homeowners insurance, you don't need receipts for them to cover stuff. I had my house broken into and the insurance asked me if I had receipts. I was like, hell no, I bought those how many years ago, and they sent me a check for money. Yeah, I have asshole neighbors or had, and they would complain about shit like the trash can just sitting in front of the garage or that my cat was sitting on the fence. Mind you, that we paid to replace the fence. They did not contribute any at all and just shit like that. And then that he sprayed Roundup on some plants in my yard, and the list goes on. Needless to say, we had to put security cameras up on the house because of them.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.